Today's episode of the Golf Intervention Podcast is made possible by the premium content subscribers on the Golf Intervention Substack. We would like to thank all of our listeners for tuning in. You make it all worthwhile. You can also subscribe to our free monthly newsletter in the same place, and that's www.thegolfintervention.substack.com, or click the link in the show notes. And welcome back to the Golf Intervention Podcast. My name is Eric Layton. I'm here with my man Rob Fales. We're two guys that teach a lot of golf, and we're out late on a Monday night working hard to help you play better golf. That's really what we're all about, isn't it, Rob?
That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. We have not been on for a little while, so I'd like to apologize for that. I've been sick. I was sick, and then I had laryngitis for 3 straight weeks. And I got to tell you, when you talk for a living, laryngitis is a problem. So I had like days at work where I was whispering to my lessons. It has not been particularly good weather, but we do teach inside. You know, we kind of go into simulator mode.
Yeah.
And so then as my voice got stronger, it'd be okay at the beginning of the day, and I'd teach all day.
Yeah.
6 hours, 7 hours, and then I'd go home and I had no voice again. Yeah. It was just like this vicious cycle.
That's rough.
But finally, I'm back and in full effect, and we're ready to pick back up on this series on the golf swing, which we put out an episode, which I've gotten a lot of feedback on in positive ways, kind of about that moment, all that really matters, that collision between the club head and the ball, and what does that do? And hopefully if you've listened to that episode, thank you for tuning in. If you haven't, go back and listen to that one, because we're going to kind of pick up on that today. And to be honest, I haven't listened to it in probably we put that out before Christmas, and I don't exactly remember all the stuff we talked about on there, but I kind of do from our outlines.
I just black out. Like people tell me what I said. I'm like, oh, that's right. that was cool.
Remember when you said that, Robbie?
I've got no idea.
No, I don't remember.
Now I do. Yeah.
But a lot of times we don't remember because we're just two guys having a conversation. So, we don't do some formal pre-written podcast. We have kind of general outlines, and we like to chat. That's kind of how this whole thing started. So we're trying to keep it loose that way. Conversational, as they say.
Yes.
And so we did outline, I think, variables between the club and the ball as a little bit of a review in that collision. And basically it boils down to the direction the club is moving up and down, in and out, and then the way the face is pointed vertically and horizontally, where that ball's smacking on the face, and how fast the club's moving when it makes collision, right? And as you put all those together, you get ball flight, right? And so hopefully we did a good job of kind of describing to you the science of that. And now as we go into this next level, when we actually start to talk about what puts a golf swing together, you know, and I've been at this for a long time, I would say on the show that like half of my life in golf and in golf instruction has been philosophical in nature in a lot of ways, and then half has been more science based. And I'm just, trust me on this, the science-based is way better. When we actually know what's going on and we can measure it is so cool. And so, and that doesn't leave really as much room for, maybe some information that's bad for people, might send people down the wrong path.
Yeah.
And so we've moved in, hopefully we're seeing a move towards less system-based instruction and more kind of functional-based instruction in a way, right? We're not as much like writing a book with a golf swing name these days and saying, here's the finer points of what
do this.
Yeah, you need to do you need to do this, or the top players do this. And now we're going into this more like, what are my options for this? So what could you do? We're going to try to so what could we do? So essentially, what we'd like to do on today's show is talk about those variables we discussed last time. They sort of boil down into a few skills, right? As we've defined in other shows, but obviously you may not have tuned into those shows, and it's always good to hear things over and over again. So the skills as defined sort of by our framework that we teach or subscribe to, we kind of boil those variables down, right,
Yep.
into actionable skills that folks can practice and understand and work on. And those skills as defined by us are basically what, Rob feels. Why don't you kind of take us through that little piece of the framework there?
Yep. So like you said earlier, they are directly responsible for the outcome, like the ball flight, right? So skill number 1 is going to be impact spot on the face. Skill number 2 is going to be face to path. And then skill number 3 is going to be clip head speed, right? And so the reason why we call them skills, and why, if you'll notice, like swing direction wasn't one of those skills, is because the differences in functional, like quote unquote, like functional for a given golfer and not are extremely, extremely small. So we're talking about differences in impact spot, quarter of an inch can be the difference between the ball hitting the face and not, which is a massive, massive, massive deal. You're going to get massively different outcomes, but the difference between that and then one that was, functional is, again, like can be 2 or 3 degrees of the club face to path, right? Which, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, every second on a clock is 6 degrees. So we're talking about like half of a second, right? And then club head speed wise, like the differences in a mile per hour, one way or the other, is huge, especially as you get closer to the hole, right? So the differences are really, really, really small. And it would be impossible to see the difference with traditional swing geometry ways of measuring that. So like video, right? You cannot look at a video and say, this is why your club head arrived a centimeter too high when it got back down to the ball. In my opinion, you can't do it, right? You cannot look on a video, right, and look at a golf swing, or let's say you had someone on 3D, right? You hooked them up to all these AMM sensors, and you're literally seeing how the joints are rotating and translating in space. And a golfer comes to you and says, hey, my club face is 2 degrees open on that shot, right? Can you show me why it was 2 degrees open? Can't, right? No. There's nothing you can see, right, in the 3D data that is going to, without a shadow of a doubt, to be able to have the certainty to say, this is why, right? So because the differences are so small, we call them skills, because in many ways it depends on your awareness of them and your awareness and your ability to adapt them if you're becoming aware of a pattern, right? So the best comp that I use is like with learning to drive a car, right? So when you start to drive a car, you're going down the lane, you have very little room on your car, one side to the other, right? And so when you first start driving, you feel like you've got like this, like no margin of error. Like I can remember when I first started driving a car, like I remember thinking to myself, there's no way that I could have a conversation right now and drive this car. Like there's no way that I could listen to music or put my attention on anything other than just keeping this car in the middle of the lane, right? But now, right, I've become aware of the lane, like the car starts to drift, right? And you feel the rumble strips on the right. You feel the rumble strips on the left, right? You've got the visual information. You've got all this feedback, right? The feedback being the clear word there that is, the key word there, that all that feedback is so clear that you become much more attuned to the small differences in being on one side of the lane versus the other. So now you have a truck coming the other way. Now it's no big deal to carry on a conversation and just allow that car to drift towards one side of that lane before then getting back to the middle, right? So with the best players in the world, they chase swing stuff because they are so aware of the skills that a 2 or 3 degree open face feels like a ton to them. They feel like they left the face just like wide open, right? When in reality, it didn't. Like it was not that, like the face was like not that open, right? And like if they hit it thin, they feel like they did this huge like standing up move, or like they felt like they did, like they got quote unquote stuck. They feel like all these things, because their awareness of these skills is so high. The differences they perceive are bigger than they actually are. So they're not perceiving those differences as like, oh, okay, wait, the club was actually just a half inch higher up off the ground. They perceive it as more of a difference. So like, I think that's why a lot of times like best players in the world, they neglect some of the skill development stuff and maybe some of the perception stuff. And they chase like swing guarantee of like, oh, if I just put my left arm in this spot or the club in this spot, like all of my problems are going to be solved, kind of thing. And it's a road to nowhere oftentimes. So, not to get on too deep of a tangent there, but
no,
the question you asked were what were the three skills, right? So impact, spot on the face, face to path, and speed.
You answered it, and that sets up the rest of the show, because what we're trying to reiterate is hitting golf shots isn't about the form of your swing. I mean, the form of your swing plays a role in it, but you got to understand the development of the skill set, right? Yeah. And what's so interesting to me is that I came to this sort of very, very similar 3-level development. And actually kind of like 3 separate, before we started this podcast, right? Like before you and I discussed this necessarily, I had this 3-level kind of developmental pyramid that I was taking my students through, because I was watching these patterns over time, teaching with TrackMan and whatnot, and it was controlling the contact on the face was kind of the base of my pyramid. It was like almost an order of operations for me, right? Like I was working on that first. And I always felt like I was working on that first, because you can't really judge the ball flight very well in practice if you don't know where you hit it on the face and how that affects it, right? Because that does affect the curvature of the shot. So I'm always working on contact. I would always say contact on the face at the functional low point of the swing arc. Like that's where we're trying to get that. And then the second level was face and path relationship, right? And then the third level was, I threw some other things in there, but speed, and it was a little different than the skills, but it was like this developmental pyramid, right? And I called it optimization. Things like speed and spin loft and all this stuff that kind of plays in, right? Mm-hmm. So the point being is, when you learn and when you teach to those skills, like I've been doing for years now, like you've been doing for years now, your students should come in and we look at the data, right? We understand this is where we decide if we're going to change the swing, okay? This is what we're talking about, right? Is we look at the data, we get their feedback, we observe, we ask questions, right? We try to understand their perceptions. We try to understand their belief system about what they're doing that's causing the ball to go where it goes. And then we have to make a judgment, either with stats or without, where we say, hey, something you're doing in this skill set is keeping you from your goals, right? And that's why most of the time they're there, right? And it always starts with, who are they and why are they there? And then how are we intending to help them? Good instructors spend a lot of time on this with a new student. And I mean a lot of time. It could be a whole hour of just trying to figure that out. I think where instruction goes wrong, and this is true for a lot of instructors, is they don't care about any of that. They have someone, and it's true. Yeah. It is true. Yeah. They come in and they say, hey, I'm not hitting it the way I want to. And then they start changing their swing. They start telling them, this is why you're doing it wrong. This is what you need to do. This is my belief system, right? And I kind of feel like, and I know you feel like, because we're on the same page here, that we need to understand the person first. What are they trying to do? What are they doing? Do they understand what causes the cause and effect of their ball flight issues that they have, or their contact issues that they have? Once you understand that, then we teach to the skills, and we start to teach them how to give themselves feedback on the skills. Yes. Right? Things like impact tape or Dr. Scholl's for contact, judging the low point with some tricks that we use in the grass if they can hit off the turf.
Differential training to become aware of the differences in the feedback.
Huge. So like trying to hit the toe, trying to hit the heel, trying to have the face open, trying to have the face closed, right? Yes. Not trying to create. So we're trying to create skills. And I think golfers, and I've been this golfer, and you've been this golfer, right? think that there's just a perfect golf swing out there.
Correct. Where it's going to guarantee, right, that
Correct.
all those skills line up time after time.
Eric, where do I put the club at the top of my backswing? Eric, what's my left-hand grip supposed to look like?
What should it be?
What should it? Am I supposed to have my toes like this? Eric, how about my posture? Eric, am I supposed to aim like this? The answer is always like maybe or probably not or sometimes or it could be or
right, exactly.
Okay? And when you take a lesson from me, I'm not giving you answers. That's not the case. But what we do is we work through that, right?
Yeah, it's like
we work through and we understand. We build an understanding.
Yeah, it's really like educating them on why you're not giving them like the direct answer, right?
Correct.
And so they have a better understanding of like, oh, wait, actually the question I should have asked was what could I do in this situation, not maybe what should I do, right?
So when I was a young college student studying golf, and we call it the Harvard of PGM schools, Methodist University. Have you heard of it, Robbie? Methodist?
Never.
Harvard of PGM school?
No, I think I don't know if it's a real school, actually.
So this would have been this is going on 25 years ago, right? So I'm trying to learn how to I want to learn how to teach people to play golf, right? That's part of my thing. I'm trying to learn to play better golf myself. And, all that was out then was, it was tough to sort through. Like,
totally.
The PGA teaching manual made no sense. The ball flight laws were wrong. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm out there trying to figure this out. All you're doing is getting advice from other college students that have no idea what they're talking about. You've been through this, right?
Yes.
No one really understood the ball flight that well or the swing that well. It was like, oh, David Ledbetter says this, and here's the 8-step Jim McLean swing, and all. Mm-hmm. And you're trying all of it. Nothing's changing. Nothing's getting better. Nope. And you're kind of trying to learn on your own. And then I discovered Michael Hebron. Do you know that name, Robbie? He came in. I think absolutely. He spoke at our school. And if he did. He didn't. He spoke somewhere that I saw him. And his book, which I had a bunch of his books, but I lost them in my house fire, so I have none anymore. But he talked about guiding people to self-discovery. Yeah. He talked about learning how the club interacts with the environment. He had these physical basics that he called like the physics of this interaction. Yeah. And he talked about understanding. And I was like, now that's different. Like, this is a different deal, right? It was from a brain standpoint first, right? And so I read this big, it looked like a textbook, and I'm like, I'm into this. Like, this is, and it's really the thing that set me on my path. I have to be honest. And I don't say I agree with everything he espouses to, but there was a lot to learn there, for sure, right? Yeah, like a lot, especially 25 years ago. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very very, very ahead of the game. So I remember as a first year assistant golf pro up in the tri-state section, a really nice club, and we brought in this seasonal pro from some highfalutin. I'm not going to name names, but worked under this well-known instructor and all this stuff. And he and I were having this conversation in the golf shop. He goes, Eric, all the great players at the top of the backswing, the club looks exactly like this. The club fit. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, really. They all. I said, really? I knew I'm someone that questions everything, right? But that was the moment of the 8-step swing, toe up, halfway back, and then this step and this position and this. That's how they taught golf back then, right? And my intuitions were kind of like, I don't care who says that. I watch golf, and it's not true, right? Yeah. I see them do all kinds of different things, right? So I've always been that curiosity of kind of questioning, right? Yeah. As we go down the road and gain understanding, this whole understanding of the process of hey, we can actually measure impact and know what happens now. Then we can learn how to train to it, right? So if your club face at the top of the backswing looks like Dustin Johnson, or your club face at the top of the backswing looks like Ernie Els, which is wide open, by the way. You consider it wide open, right? And then Dustin really closed, right? You've got this bit, right? Those guys still have skills. They have all the same skill set. So there isn't a perfect position. This is what we're trying to say is there is no perfect anything. But what you learn is the influences and the options. Like,
Yep.
what are my skills that I'm developing and what influences them? Okay. So let's go back into the situation again. Like, here I am, I come for a lesson with Robbie or another good teacher somewhere, and I'm a 20 handicap, right?
Yeah.
Eric, I'm a 20 handicap. Okay, good. It's off season. You signed up for some lessons. What are your goals? I want to be a 10. Actually, I'd like to be a single digit. I'm going to put more time into it this year. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I need you to coach me up, right? So in that situation, what are we going to do? We're going to ask a lot of questions about their game,
Yep.
right? Maybe they come with data. They probably don't. Like, how many people walk into your teaching bay for the first time and say, hey, here's a list of all my GameForge data or my strokes gain? Like, it happens
1%.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
1
it is
to
very
2%. Yeah.
So in that conversation, which, like I told you, could be 30, 40 minutes or the full hour, you're trying to get to know the student and understand what their swing situation is,
Yeah.
what they believe influences it properly or improperly, what they like about it, what they don't like about it.
Yep.
We're asking a lot of questions, right? We're the ones that are trying to learn, actually.
Yeah.
Like, we're not teaching yet. We're learning. We're
Yes.
learning the student. We teach later, right?
Yes.
Together with the student, we share that journey. And so I know I always start with kind of like that, what I was saying. How's the impact control? And what's the face and path relationship like? That's kind of where I'm always starting in that first lesson and trying to understand
Yeah.
what they believe about it. And then I will tell you that what we're going to get into now is options for changing that stuff, right? Or adapting or whatever you want to call it. So this part of the episode could be infinitely long. Okay.
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah.
You don't remember this. Maybe you do remember this, but Rob Fales was a 19-year-old first-year intern watching me teach. I was the head golf professional at the Country Club of Virginia.
Probably going to get
and I'm out on the range.
Here we go.
Robbie's the most curious person I've ever met in my life. And Eric, Mr. Layton, do you mind if I watch you teach this afternoon? I'm all, oh, yeah, come on. So I remember I had this person who was like over-the-top slicer, and we actually worked on their actual shape of their swing first before we worked on the club face at all. And Robbie, you said, you can't do that. You always have to you got to work on the club face first. You have to. I'm like, well, no, you don't have to.
You don't have to.
You don't have to. A lot of times you do, but you don't have to. And for whatever reason in that situation, we didn't. I'm guessing the shape of the swing was so poor that the kinetics of it all couldn't set up right to square club face. So that was probably why we started there first, but I don't remember. But I just remember that was like, hey, you know what? We have options. Right?
Yeah.
And so as we talk about the skills, you want to take on kind of skill by skill and kind of go through some options about what we see. And so controlling the impact spot on the face.
Yeah.
I kind of add in at the functional low point, right? Like, man, when you talk about options, and some of the options the player can be very aware of, which may or may not help, and we'll get into that in a second, because sometimes the awareness isn't quite right for what's going to help you. And so the very first thing I know I do in that situation is try to develop with the student an understanding of why the impact location is being either inconsistent or consistently in the wrong place, because those are two different things, right?
Right. Yeah.
So do you take on a similar sort of?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tell me about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So like when I see a student for the first time, a lot of times we're doing just about a 20 to 25 ball assessment, and I've got like a little Excel sheet that I've made that like keeps track of their dispersion. So like what their skill level is, right? We'll hold up fingers and try to figure out what their dispersion is, and like when the ball is finishing outside the dispersion, I'm keeping track of, is it because the impact spot's high or low, toe or heel? Is it because the face is open or close to the path too much? Or is it because it's speed related, right? And so the first 25 shots or so is just trying to collect data on, okay, at least in this context, right, which is super decoupled, it's on a range, it's no consequences, no space variability, anything like that. Like, what's the primary reason why the ball's not finishing inside the dispersion, right? And ultimately, all three skills are linked, right? So you can't really separate them, but you've got to be able to tell the student and you have a really super clear goal of like what we're doing, like what we're trying to do essentially, right? And so after that, really, I'm trying to get their awareness of the feedback, right? So I might start asking them questions. Okay, so what'd you notice there? And most of the time it's, oh, that was a good shot or a bad shot. Right? That's the feedback that we get. Felt good, felt bad, right? So that's where we try to get them to, okay, well, as opposed to making it subjective, can we make it objective? Like, where did the ball hit the face? Where's the face point? And then if they can start to get aware of that, then we start talking about, all right, well, here's step number one for me is like, do they have any sort of perception of the club and where it is in space, right? So this is where we get into differential training. Can you get the bottom of your golf swing higher, lower, further forward, further backward on purpose? I usually do those main two. You can do bottom of the swing like further from the target, closer to the target. In my experience, though, like usually that's with a better player. Usually that's a little more shot specific, because oftentimes with recreational golfers, when they try to change where the low point is closer or further from the target, a lot of stuff changes. Like they'll change swing direction, and it's hard not to. You know, in fairness, it's very difficult not to. Whereas when it comes to arc height, right, basically the height of where the bottom of the swing is, as well as the distance from the golfer forward and back, it's a lot easier to change those without changing everything else, right? So a little bit of differential training. I'll have them just alternate. Can you get the bottom of the swing higher, lower, higher, lower, higher, lower, and just start to experience how it sounds, what it looks like, what it feels like, to try to get these like kind of like a library of feels essentially, right? A library of feedback is actually what I'm looking for there. Mm-hmm. So then after they've done it enough, right, if they can do it, you know, that's what we're going to talk about actually here, then I'll say, all right, just swing. Don't try and do anything. I don't want you to try to hit a good shot or bad shot. Just tell me afterwards where it hit on the face, or, you know, or where the face was pointed, right? And so it's usually when I have them just do that is when they'll hit their best shots, because number one, they just spent time essentially calibrating their perception of the club, high, low, or forward, back, or open face, close face, open face, close face. And then I gave them a very freeing task of like, oh, we're not going to try to hit a good one. We're just going to swing the club and see what happens, right? So typically when we're in that state of openness to the future, like allowing the outcome to just be what it is and allowing the future to be uncertain, that's when we swing the most freely. That's when we get the actual access to the skills that we're developing, and they end up hitting better shots in that scenario. Now, in those scenarios, it's very likely that we are never going to touch swing, right? Because they can do it, right? And they can change it, and they're aware of it. And if they know how to practice it, then fine, like some swing stuff might change in the process of them developing that skill, but that is functional variability. I want their swing to be able to change shot to shot to achieve a certain task. Totally cool with that. Mm-hmm. There are times where when I say, okay, most of your shots that finish, you know, you had 6 of 20 shots that finished inside your dispersion. Of the 14 that were outside your dispersion, 11 of them were just because the ball hit the heel. Cool. Let's see if we can alternate where that bottom of the swing is, forward and back, and change it. And there are times where a golfer has an extremely difficult time with doing that, right? Where if I don't start to like get in there and change their interpretation of the task, maybe I might lose them. They might just like, you know, like they might just, I will get through the lesson, but I probably won't see them again. Right? So this is when we get into swing stuff, is when the skills and the access to those skills are disproportionately harder for a golfer, right? So what are our options to change swing? Number one is, again, their conventions for, okay, well, what is this thing I'm trying to do? Because, like, I'll give them the task sometimes, like, hey, can you just get the bottom of the swing further forward, further back? But a lot of times it's where they're placing their attention to do it. I had the same thing happen 2 days ago. I had a lady who we were just doing club face stuff, like open, close, open, close, open, close. And every time I asked her to present the face closed, she could do it no problem. If I asked her to present the face open at impact, it was like straight. Like it would, the ball never started right of target, right? And so the first thing I asked her is, okay, are you aware of how you're trying to do that? And by the way, I'd prefer like long term if you weren't, but like what ideas do you have around like how you're trying to do this? And really quickly she said, yeah, I'm just focusing on like my left hand. Like she was just only thinking about her left hand, like what her left hand was doing. And so then basically what I did is I put the club up in front of her and I said, okay, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to see if you can tell me when I put the club in your hands, where the face is relative to the shaft. Is it to the left or to the right? And so I put the club in her hands, had her kind of waggle it around a little bit. She said, it's to the left. And then she opened her eyes and lo and behold, it was to the left of the shaft, right? And then we did the other way. And then I actually gave her a task of saying, all right, I'm just going to hand you the club in any old orientation, keeping your eyes closed, and I want you to try and get the face back to kind of squarish. And she did okay. But then right after she did, I asked, okay, when you were doing that, was your attention on your hands? And she was like, oh, no. Like I was feeling the weight of the club. I was like, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So how would the weight of the club feel if you had the face open versus had the face closed? Okay, can you really put your focus into the feeling of the weight of the club when it hits the ball? And she was able to actually get the face point to the right when she put her attention on the feeling of the face, as opposed to thinking about her hand, right? So like to me, in terms of like swing intervention, like attentional focus and like where you're placing your awareness is pretty high up. I mean, some people just have like a convention of how it's done that is straight up like completely hindering their ability to complete that skill. Like I've had golfers who I'll show them face to path what it is. But then when I ask them to demonstrate what it is, they end up showing me like in plane rotation, or they'll show me like something that's completely out, like not even relevant to what we're doing. Right. So that's the convention piece of it. And then sometimes, right, they'll be putting their attention in a nice spot. They'll have functional conventions. They just need to explore options and give them some tasks and some different ways to explore changing it. Right. So I think that's kind of the order that I like to do it a lot of times.
So there's a lot of people listening to this right now that are going, why would you ever teach that woman to open the club face? Why would you ever teach that woman to close? Like, what's that all about? Why not just teach her to hit it straight? Or, I think there's an understanding there with golfers again. Like, I just want to hit it straight. And I want to hit it that way all the time. And I saw this. I told you I saw a little Twitter thread the other day from a former tour player who was on tour when Tiger was at his greatest, right? So the answer, before I tell the story, the answer to the question, why would you do that, is, you said the word, functional adaptability, right? Like you want to be able to develop these feels and these understandings so that you can adapt them, right? Because every day is different. And here's the story that the guy told. He was at a tournament on the West Coast. I don't remember which one it was, Torrey Pines or Riviera or something like that. And it might have been Riviera. Riviera is the one with the net on the range. It might have been Riviera.
Yeah.
So they're at Riviera, and this guy was playing well. So Tiger had come off. He and Tiger had come off the course kind of around the same time, both like later in the day. And Tiger had really struggled with his driver that day, like just hitting it all over the place. And Tiger could get into that at times, right? With that much speed, like he definitely hit the ball wayward with his driver at times. And so he said that Tiger was beside him after the round, hitting balls and just working through his driver, and just couldn't really work it out. Just like for whatever reason, he just wasn't making progress. So he then just puts the driver away and pulls out, the guy said maybe 5 or 6 iron, and starts hitting these moon ball irons that were starting like 40 yards left and slicing like massively in the air. He said higher than the netting, and then slicing like 40 yards. And he was doing it over and over again. And then he got out another club and he started hitting, he said maybe like a 7 or 8 iron, and started hitting, he said flag height, which obviously is an exaggeration, but like these little bullets that were carrying 125, 145 yards, like, and he's like, Tiger, like, what are you doing over there? And Tiger just said, hey, like, I know I don't have the driver tomorrow, so I'm going to figure everything else out. Like, if it goes like this, I got to make sure I have everything else.
Yeah,
and Tiger was like the king of adaptability, right? Like the king of that. He would say all the time, I go to the range and see what I have, and then I just work with what I've got. Mm-hmm. And so, like, when you're teaching functional adaptability, this is what we want out of our students. Like, if I'm hitting it fat, I want to know why. If I'm hitting the ground first, like, I'm just being like, this could be a 20 handicapper, right? Hey, when you go out here hitting the ground first, this is what we've worked through. Now you have some options to manipulate that. Hey, I'm shanking it, right? I am shanking it off the hosel today, Eric. Okay, good. Let's try to do something else. Let's try to hit it somewhere else on the club face, right? And if you train that, if you have those days where it's extreme on the toe or extreme on the hill or whatever, you have a toolbox of things you can do to adapt, right? And then that comes into play because we don't play off perfectly flat lies all the time, right? So I've got to adapt this to lie, slope, and wind, right? Which is at another situation. And by the way, if you're really interested in that, Robbie and I did a great like hour and a half episode on it, lie, slope, weather adjustments on the Substack. So if you subscribe to the premium, you can get that on there. Phenomenal episode. So anyway, I digress. But the point is, golf hasn't always been taught the way you just described it, right? And I think it's actually pretty rare still these days. Hopefully, we are influencing some of that with the show. I know we're hearing from coaches who are, and I know our coaches at the country club, a lot of them are adapting. You know, we have a lot. We've got 13 that teach there, so they're adapting, and I think it's great. I think this is really. Michael Hebron, I'll go back to him, was on this a long time ago, a lot of this a long time ago. And people will argue with him, call him all kinds of names because they just think he's off his rocker. But at the end of the day, if your concept is, hey, I got to find the perfect stance, the perfect ball position, the perfect grip, and the perfect backswing on the perfect quote-unquote swing plane with the perfect whatever at the bottom and rotation and all this, and I got to learn to just repeat that, repeat, and have it never go wrong, golf's going to be hard for you for the rest of the time that you play it because it's actually really difficult to do that, right? And I think there's a lot of tour players that are still on that hunt. I mean, I see that. Yeah. For sure. On the range that when I'm hosting tour players once a year, I'm seeing that for sure. And so I think the adaptability and the skill development piece is the thing that can really... I see people playing a lot better golf because of it, right? Yes. A lot better golf. And it go ahead.
Yeah, and so like as we kind of start to talk about swings, again, we're 38 minutes in, but we really want you to understand why, like, again, it's so often just like fifth, sixth, seventh thing down the line that we're doing to actually help somebody. And it's not in the context of us saying, okay, this is what you have to do. It's okay, here's some options of things that could allow you to be more skillful. And so that's why we start with, okay, can you change those skills, right? Can you move the bottom of your swing up, down, forward, back, right, left? Can you get the face right and left, right? Can you get the speed higher and lower? Because you need to figure out, okay, is this a perception issue? Is this a concept issue? If you flush all that out, right, and the golfer is not managing those skills, predicting those skills to the level that they want, then we need to look under the hood and say, okay, what can we do to make these skills easier? For me, oftentimes, if I can do it pre-swing, right, in terms of how they're holding it, how they're standing, right, and even the stuff before the club starts moving, I want to do that if at all possible, because in general, and I'm going to make a very general statement here, things that happen when the club starts moving are infinitely easier for golfers to be aware of and actually change than what happens after the club starts to pick up momentum, right?
Oh yeah, so static versus dynamic. Like there's no question. The static stuff is. I taught that
easier.
way. I taught that way for years before I had TrackMan.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, I think golf was taught for a long time where it was like, hey, you're not swinging it hitting it the way you want to. I'm not real sure like, how I can ascribe a data point to that to help you hit 5 more greens in regulation.
Right.
I have no idea about that, but what I'm going to do is try to make you swing in the form that I think is best, right? Like swing form.
Yeah.
And then hope upon hope
Yes.
that you hit it better.
Yeah.
And sometimes that worked and sometimes it didn't.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's just not the way it goes. It should not be the way that it goes anymore.
Yeah, agreed.
It should not. And to your point, it's like, here we are down the list. Like, is my process, is my pre-shot, is my
we didn't even talk about,
is my adapt, is my, all that. Like,
Yeah.
Because in a lesson, for the most, like this is the weakness of golf instruction in a way, is like, we're getting feedback from them on like things like, hey, when if I'm asking the question like, does this lie harder for you? Is in the rough harder for you? But I'm not seeing it.
Right.
I'm not in the environment with them. I'm in a controlled environment.
Yeah, like we kind of just started with skill today, and there's really only one, like within our framework, right? We've got like score intent, right? Score strategy, and then we have our shot process. Those two are like before we even get to skill stuff.
Before.
Right? Absolutely right. So it's like,
yeah.
How many like putting stroke, like I love using this analogy in putting, like how many putting strokes have gotten better without ever talking about a putting stroke, just by getting people to understand that, hey, they're actually starting the ball where they're intending. They're just not picking the right intent for where the ball should, like where the ball needs to start for this putt, right?
Oh yeah, you can't read a green. So
you can't read a green, right? So like,
correct.
I mean, we could probably literally spend this entire episode thinking of all the things we do before we ever mention or try to change swing stuff. Like, number one is like, hey, are you a 15 handicapper when you get short-sighted with a deep bunker in front, where your bunker, you're gonna take 2 shots to get out of the bunker. Like your bunker game is a weakness, right? You're 15 yards from the green, the pin's short-sighted, and you're gonna flash your lob wedge open and make this big swing trying to because you believe that you're supposed to try to get it within 6 feet as a 15 handicapper. Like,
right.
All right, let's flush that out first, right? Like that, I would call that the scoring strategy issue, right? Is your shot process garbage, right? Are you worried about all stuff that doesn't matter, which is like, okay, what are other people doing here on this hole? Like, what
are they watching me?
Right? Are people watching me? Like,
what club did you hit there?
Exactly. Like, hey, like the next hole's a birdie hole, right? So that means like,
like I gotta make a birdie here because the next one's the hard one.
I gotta make up for that, right?
Yeah.
All these things that are happening off time, like in the future or the past, that are actually that are getting into your shot process. Like, hey, we got this whole shot process thing that we can flush out to get people better. Like, and then a lot of the skill stuff is just perception. It's like, hey, you think the club is here, right? You think the club head is here. For my video, this is on video, but you'll get it. You think the club head is here. It's actually somewhere about 1.5 inches somewhere different. Yeah. Okay, well, like that's not a swing issue. It's just perception. Like, it's the same thing as like, hey, when you started, like if you took a wedge and tried to bounce the ball off the wedge, you probably for the first time could get like maybe 2 or 3. And then now as you continue to improve your perception and skill, right, you can get now up to like 50, 60, 70. I mean, it's a lot of that stuff, right? And then it's like, okay, well, if someone can, this is maybe a good example. Like, all right, if someone can't bounce the ball off the wedge more than like 2 or 3 times, and they've been trying for like, like, months, right? And they can't get it more than 2 or 3 times. Well, maybe they're just not holding the face flat, right? Hopefully,
right.
That, and then going from, okay, your face is actually not like flat. Okay, let's make it flat. Now that's going to make the skill easier. That would be an example of a technique, of a swing improvement. Like, okay, you just did something that now makes that skill way easier, right? That needs to be the context by which we do swing interventions. And Eric, what's the likelihood that the first thing you think of for a client is actually going to end up being the thing they need to do to make the skills easier? What are the chances that it's the first thing you think of?
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but it's not
not
likely.
very. It's not very
it's
high.
Not likely.
It's not likely.
It's not. And again, because I'm trying not to influence that too much. I want it to come from the player, right? I'm trying to draw it out of the player. And so
that's where,
that's where you say that here's options and here's things.
And that's where like an experienced coach is going to stack the deck in your favor. It's like, okay, if you've going to see a coach that is taught for 20 years, who's helped a lot of golfers, well, and it just means that probably their first guess or like their intuition is probably going to be a little higher likelihood than someone who's a little less experienced. But still, it's like you don't know. Like you don't know. Like when I have a golfer in front of me, I don't know. Okay, if I change their grip, I don't know what's going to happen. All right, you're just making a guess. You're making a bet. So you need to, in my opinion, and I've gotten a lot of really good feedback from this, by the way. Like students love this. When you say, all right, we have some options available. We're going to test this together. We're going to hold it like this. This is not me saying that you have to do this for forever. This is, okay, we're going to go on this journey to see if this actually makes a difference.
I say, let's do an experiment.
Experiment. Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
let's do a science experiment.
We're going to move your grip a little bit. We're going to hit some shots. We're just going to see what happens. Right. And again, it allows them to perform more freely in that context, because a lot of times if you say, okay, this is the way to hold it, then they're going to have the expectation that, okay, now all my problems should be solved, right?
Correct.
No.
You're giving them the answer. Yeah, this is the answer.
And then they have the expectation that, all these skills are going to line up. No.
Nope.
So the way in my opinion, we need to structure this is more of like, all right, we have this skill that we're trying to move. Let's explore, let's experiment, let's see if there's an option that you like that's going to help make it a lot easier. And I like using that for feedback. Like, hey, did that feel easier? Did that feel more manageable to you? I think is a good way to go about it. And obviously, if you've got TrackMan running, if you're using finger dispersions, if you're taking some measurable, it makes it much easier to tell that story than if it's like, oh yeah, that felt better. Like, oh, that felt worse. Like those are the worst. Yeah. Like if the only feedback you or the player are aware of was, oh, that felt good or that felt bad, we're probably not gonna get to anywhere of
no, you're trying to judge their ability to, is that something that's comfortable for them, and do they believe in it, and can they reproduce it when they need to, when it's on their own. So to kind of wrap that little bullet point in my sort of like philosophical thing that I produce, right? One of my slides says, mechanical changes should not occur if the current swing can produce the shots necessary to accomplish scoring goals, but the player has equipment issues, lack of effective practice techniques or habits, lack of effective routine, mindset limitations, strategy issues, or weaknesses in their scoring in other areas, like short game, like putting and short game, right? And so as we're trying to get there, that's kind of like have we done all that other stuff first?
Right.
Because if we haven't, we're not doing them any favors. And that's why I've never created a swing that you name and then you sell to people, right? Because then they have to believe that's the answer, right?
That's right.
They have to believe that's the answer. The club shaft needs to stand up like this in position 5B or whatever all this stuff is. Like, well, yeah, maybe or maybe not, right? And so if Jim Furyk does it like this and Tiger Woods does it like this and, Graham McDowell did it like that and like all these swings that are unique and interesting, did you happen to hear, as an aside, did you watch the TGL thing last week?
I did, just a little bit.
Awesome. I loved it, by the way.
I think it's got potential.
I'm gonna be tuning in. Yeah, lots of potential.
They've got some things they need to. They've got some things they need to work out. It's not.
It's not perfect. But it's a good start.
Yeah.
And the one thing they learned is don't put Tiger in the booth. He's not the greatest commentator. But they were asking him about Ludwig Oberg's golf swing.
Yeah.
And did you hear Tiger? Did you catch the part where he was trying to describe it?
He doesn't do anything wrong. It's just like up and down.
He's like, it's up and it's down. It's perfect. It's great. I thought that was super interesting, right? Just hearing Tiger try to verbalize what it is that he sees in this swing. And what is it that Tiger's seeing? I'll tell you what he's seeing. He's seeing the ball rocket off the club face and going, you know what? That's a good swing, in my opinion, right? Like, it is a simple swing. It's an aesthetic swing. But at the end of the day, he absolutely smashes it and hits it so good.
Yeah.
And, then you're trying to describe function. Well, Tiger couldn't describe function, is what I'm trying to say. It's up and it's down and it's good.
We're drawn to, I think, as humans, we enjoy things that are symmetrical. So I think there's an assumption that is made that, okay, if my swing has this nice symmetry to it, then I'm going to hit good shots. And so like that's creating a direct link between the swing and the shot, right? And you're missing the whole skill piece in between, right? Which was what 90% of golfers do.
Yeah. So as we go into, do you want to take on some options on the face? Do we do options on the impact on the face? I don't know if we really even.
No, we never got.
We haven't
there.
covered that yet.
No,
we kind of introed it for the last 27 minutes.
We did. No, but I mean, what we did was we really we layered context behind.
No,
so we talked about the impact physics last episode. Now we're talking about we're going to get into swing, but before we do that, when are we addressing that? Well, it's after we flush out scoring strategy, shot process, skill awareness, right? And then in order to change swing, right, before we even get into like, hey, here are the options available to change your skill bias, it's about your convention, right? It's about where you're placing your attention, right? It's about, the free, like the mindset that you're bringing to a golf swing, right? Is it one of, oh gosh, this ball has to go here or else, right? Or that didn't work. How about this one? Like, right, yeah.
You give them a kind of working through a kind of complex change at the bottom of the arc, and they go, oh, that didn't work after one swing. No. We got to stick with this for a few swings, right? We got to accept the messiness of that, and kind of that's what the growth mindset teaches us. Like, we've got to be okay with failing for a swing or two or three or five.
That's like here's a good comp to that. Like, you've got an amateur blackjack player, right, who's never played before, right? And they go to the blackjack table and they just get smoked. Like, they lose like a ton of money. And then, but they get really curious. They're like, okay, I'm going to like learn how to play blackjack. Like, this was actually really interesting. And so they learn basic strategy, and they learn it really, really well. Like, they go through all the stuff to like, and this is like the teacher's experience. Like a golfer goes to see a teacher to get all this this knowledge and this experience, and they have access to this. And the coach says, okay, this is probably your highest likelihood thing to spend your time on. All right. So you've learned basic strategy. So you go to the blackjack table and like you get your cards and you follow basic strategy, right? And you lose the hand. And then you're like, oh wait, no, like basic strategy doesn't work. I just lost that hand. First hand. This doesn't work.
It didn't work. I'm back to my old stuff.
That's literally what it is.
That's a great comparison. Yeah. And I would say the golf swing is so complex that, and again, that's why I love TrackMan, because if we're changing things at the bottom of the swing arc, it's not likely we're going to hit great shots right away. But what we want to do is see things going in the right direction. And then, there will be some adaptability. Then all of a sudden, like, wow, like if I really am changing where the low point is relative to the ball, I'm likely changing where the ball is hitting on the face at the same time.
Yeah.
And so, because the club is not just moving up and down differently, it's moving in and out differently at that same time. Depending on the club, it's more or less, but it takes time to adapt to that, right? And then maybe we end up changing ball position or adjusting, who knows, adjusting something else. And so we're just always kind of taking those pieces and manipulating them a little bit and letting the skill play out and building that awareness as to what they're feeling and what's producing from that.
Yep.
And it takes a little bit of time, and it takes a little bit of acceptance, of what could happen.
Yes.
both positively and negatively, to kind of let it play out. And that's one of the things that I'm proud. I do think I communicate. If I had to judge myself on teaching, like I'm always thinking about that. Like, what do I do well? What do I not do well? I think I do that well because I tend to have students that are very patient with their development, by and large. And they understand the process and they work towards it.
Yeah, and you play a big role in fostering that understanding.
You have to, right? Yeah, you have to foster that. And I think that's kind of the teacher mentality. Like if you are a good coach, you have that sort of encouraging, I don't know, way of manner about you, or whatever you want to say. And so I want to bring this up, as we were talking, as I was driving today in the car, I said, I think that if we kind of take it through the framework, that might be a full episode. And you're like, I don't know.
We're at 15. No, you're right.
I don't know if it would be a full episode. I think that...
I think that was an episode.
I think it was an episode. So I will tell you, I had a lesson. This is the time of year I enjoy probably the most in teaching, because again, we do teach a lot here in the winter in Central Virginia, although the conditions are not great for golf, right? So people are still taking lessons. I have heated bays, and then we have simulator bays, like with TrackMan, so I could just keep pushing it out. And so I'm teaching a lot, and people will come in and I'll say, hey, this is in your periodization of your season. This is the off season, which is a really good time to be patient and kind of work through some skill development in a way that can really help you when you come out in the spring. Like, because you don't have to go play every third day working through development, which can be a little detrimental at times, right? It can kind of push you backwards at times. So you kind of revert to the safe space easier that way. When you're not playing as much, you can kind of work through some practice and do some things, go out and play in a way where you're not even keeping score, hit shots, practice shots on the course. Totally. See that type of development. So that's what I encourage through the winter, right? Like, you don't need to post your scores this time of year. Let's go practice on the course when you have an opportunity, 100%. Hit shots, work through it. And so to kind of go through, like, as an example, right? You gave an example with the lady. I'll give an example. Someone who's a listener to the show, real nice guy. And I've given him a couple lessons, kind of worked with him on his driver. I think I fit him for his driver. And he was like, I want to get better. I'm a 6 handicap. Now, his club speed is massive. Like, I'm talking like 112, 115 with the driver. Like, easy.
Yeah.
And so in the season, we're kind of, I'm helping him manage that, right? Like, I'm helping him manage. Like, he's not one that's like, man, I want to win the club championship tomorrow. No, I'm a 6 handicap. I want to be scratch. I want to win the US. He's not that. He enjoys golf, plays with his wife, like, has fun, has great friends. They're all pretty good players. But now I was kind of like, all right, let's do some lessons and work through, because his club path, meaning, the movement of the club head at impact with the ball, is -11 on a 7-iron at 92 miles an hour. Okay. So that creates some dispersion. And for a person with young kids and a day job and travel and that much speed, there's going to be days that are good and days that are not great, right? They're going to be more difficult days. And so when he came in, we were just kind of talking about, what goals he might have. And he wasn't saying, I want to be a 0 or anything like that. But I think he just wants to play better and better. And so we we were able to, go through this framework, right? Like he practices well, like all this stuff is fine. Mindset's great. Routines are good enough. Like all that was fine. He's got a -11 path on his 7-iron. Like,
Yeah.
we got some work to do there, right?
Yeah.
Like we knew it, we identified it, and then we had to back that into mechanical changes, right? Like because his swing had to change. Like when I tried to get him to hey, you're swinging 11 this way, can you swing 11 the other way? No chance.
Yeah.
Every swing, he had a pivot issue. It wasn't going to change with much of anything. So we had to work through it, right? And the reason why was because he wasn't going to be able to produce that smaller dispersion with the swing that he had.
Yeah.
But he didn't need a swing overhaul either. So that's
Right.
the other thing. It was like we focused on one part of his pivoting action, which I won't go on into totally. But he got that down all the way to like -4 consistently by the end of the first lesson. And here's the other thing that I tell people, right? And this is part of, I think, this modern framework of instruction, is that let's say you've determined, oh, my face is wide open. I got to work on that. Or my path is way this way or that way. Or my low, like, okay, all this stuff. There is no here's point A where I am and point B where I want to be. It just doesn't work that way. Right? Eric,
Yep.
what's my path supposed to be? Well,
Supposed to.
smaller number than 11. Let's start with that, right? Like, is it supposed to be 0? No, not necessarily.
Yep.
Just depends on what shot you're hitting, like what we're trying to do. But point being, if point A is -11 and then point A subsection 1 was -4 or 5 by the end of the first lesson.
Beautiful.
That's development, right? That's understanding. That's development. I can now correlate things that I feel and see into what I'm producing on the ball flight, and I can go work. I give him stuff he can do in front of a mirror, right? Like this is kind of how it all plays out. So that big picture really helps us as we look at it and go. But it wasn't, hey, my idea of your swing is this. Let's do it.
Yeah.
And then you'll play better. And I think that's where people really got in trouble in the past.
Totally.
It was his swing still. We just kind of were tweaking some
Right.
parts
And
of
so,
it.
like, with that change, it's going to be very likely that if you asked him to get the face to path on either side, right, close the path, open the path, very likely would have an
You
easier
froze
chance to
on
do
my
that
end.
now than he did swinging 11
Are you
left.
there?
Would be one thing, right? And then 2 would be it's very likely the ball speed, right? So with driver
So
especially.
you froze on my end for a long time, so I'm not sure if
Okay, I'll get into that again. So in this case, right, with your student, it's very likely that if asked to get the face to path on either side of 0, closed to path, open to path, he'd have an easier time now than he would when he was 11 left, right?
no question.
And then also, where it has ball speed implications, right? So for his goals, it's going to be much easier to achieve a higher ball speed that he needs to reach par 4 greens in 2, like we've talked about, with a 4 path than an 11 path, right? So that's ball speed, right? So it all comes back to, okay, what are we doing to influence these skills, right? And we're not just going to adjust the swing because we think you can't, like, yeah, I mean, you could play with an 11 path if you swing at 120, right? And have elite face to path awareness and impact spot
no
awareness.
trees on the golf course.
Right? So, like, yeah, exactly. And, like, let's say you play without trees on the golf course. Sure, fine. Go for
Because
it.
you can curve it anywhere
Right?
you want to. You play. Now, Bubba has
but-
massive, I'm sure Bubba Watson's path is crazy,
Yeah.
right? But he's learned how to your point, elite management.
But for you and your student, for someone who, like, he needs the ball speed help. He needs, right, the ability to get his face on either side of the path. He needs some help there, right? So it's just going to make life easier for him, and that's why we do it.
No question. So anything you'd like to add to this episode?
I don't think so. I think next time,
really fun for
next time we're going to work through the skills and say, okay, let's say that we have absolutely flushed out all of these things like this, these housekeeping items, right?
Yeah.
Then what are
We've
our
worked through the
options,
framework.
right?
Yep. So that's what we'll focus on. We'll focus on options next time when it comes to things like low point, contact on the face to path relationship, speed. We'll take it through. Yeah, I think that's all I got for tonight. That was really fun for me.
That was fun. Yeah,
Thanks,
that was a good
Rob
one.
Fails.
Thank you.
And like we said earlier, if you want to support the show, thegolfintervention.substack.com is a great way to do that. And if you sign up, we are doing a newsletter now monthly, and that's free. So you can sign up there free on the Substack, and you will get a monthly newsletter from us, which we're going to do, like just some articles. I think on the one we're about to send it out tomorrow for January. I wrote some stuff about the new drivers that are out, that are just coming out. I've already done some product training, so I'm giving some little behind-the-scenes tidbit information there. And we introduced Dr. Mike Kay, who's coming on the show. Robbie did an article about his background and some other stuff that we put in there. So, so free newsletter monthly, so sign up for that. And if you want to be a premium subscriber, I was trying to figure out how many different posts we had on the premium side, and it's got to be approaching 30 at this point.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
So it's a mix of videos and podcasts, bonus podcasts, and articles that Robbie and I write, and practice techniques from the great Rob Fails. And so check that out. And last thing, if you don't mind, if you haven't before, make sure you subscribe to us on your favorite podcast feeder. That does really help. And then also, if you can rate and review with that 5-star rating, we'd love to build that up a little bit. I know we haven't asked to do that in a while, but it does help from what I'm learning.
Doesn't hurt.
And someone told me, Eric, you got to get him to like, rate, and review. So there you go. Like, rate, and review, if you don't mind. If you got a minute and you're not driving. That's all I got. So next time, the skills, the options for making those skill changes. I can't wait for that episode.
It's going to be fun.
All right, Rob Fails. Thank you, buddy. That was a great episode, and I will talk to you next time.
Cheers.